All right. Welcome everyone to the Society for Science and User Research Facilities webinar on ORCID. ORCID stands for the Open Researcher and Contributor ID, and I'm Dan Powers, the director of the Society. I'm grateful to have three experts here today to discuss this topic, and they'll be describing how ORCID's technologies have been evolving and how ORCID is used amongst federal research facilities. Before I introduce our speakers, a few words about the Society. Our mission is to provide a consolidated voice to those engaged in, supporting, or otherwise involved in research at our nation's federal laboratory user facilities. And our member facilities are globally renowned as the most specialized and brilliant network of fundamental research laboratories available to the most visionary scientists from across the globe. As part of our mission, we provide best practices, webinars, and communications. And today we hope that you'll be able to watch this entire webinar. And of course, following today's presentation, we will hope that there's conversations prompted in your facilities to build on this knowledge and get additional discussions going about how ORCID could be a resource amongst your protocols. If you're interested in helping set up webinars with SSURF, we have several volunteer committees and opportunities for our members to contribute. You can reach me at dan.powers@surf.org, and that's SSURF with 2 S's. For the webinar today, please enter your comments and questions into the chat function. I'll be moderating those, and yes, we're recording this. It will be available on our new YouTube channel and through our social media threads over the next couple days. So let's get to our discussion. Today's speakers include Shauna Sandler. She is the Engagement Manager of Outreach and Partnerships, responsible for overseeing ORCID's global strategic relations and outreach initiatives. Shauna has a background in academic digital librarianship and has worked with research organizations in the US, Canada, and Australia. Jacki Flood is the lead master user agreement specialist for Argonne National Laboratory and is in charge of the ORCID implementation for Argonne's Advanced Photon Source. She graduated from Lewis University with a bachelor's in education. And then also Carly Robinson. She is the Department of Energy's Office of Science and Technical Information Assistant Director for the Office of Information Products and Services. The IPS leads the OSTI Persistent Identifier Services and manages development of OSTI search tools, providing curation, communications, management of interagency and international products, and policy development and implementation. She has a PhD and MS in atmospheric chemistry from the University of Colorado and a BS in applied physics from Michigan Technological University. So those are our fantastic speakers. And let's turn to Shauna. You'll start us off, Shauna.
Great. Thanks so much, Dan. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us here today. So a quick agenda overview. So first, I'm going to provide a quick overview of ORCID. Then Carly is going to talk about the US government ORCID Consortium and some of their use cases. Then Jacki's going to give us a demo of Advanced Photon Source's ORCID integration. Carly will then discuss the Presidential Memorandum NSPM 33. And then I'll circle back at the end to provide an update on some of the new persistent identifier initiatives that this community might find interesting. Okay, so what is ORCID? So ORCID is a nonprofit organization that provides 3 core services. First, we issue unique ID numbers to people, usually researchers. Second, we provide a record with each unique ID number so people can document their research activities. And then third, ORCID provides a technical infrastructure to share this data with other systems in the scholarly communications ecosystem, usually publishers, funders, and research organizations. So while ORCID is free to individuals to use, as a global nonprofit organization, ORCID is sustained by a membership structure for organizations interested in using our ORCID registry. So let's take a closer look at ORCID for researchers. So to demonstrate how ORCID works for researchers, we have Sofia Maria Hernandez Garcia here to demonstrate. So please imagine Sofia is a researcher that have been awarded time at your organization. Sofia went to our website, orchid.org, registered for an ORCID ID, and spent approximately 2 minutes populating her data. So this is the 16-digit number that you see here on the screen, ending in 2427, which is unique to Sophia. So when Sophia signed up for an ORCID ID, she was automatically assigned a record to capture her research activities. So I'd like to point out a few key sections of this record. So first, on the left-hand side, we provide the researcher the opportunity to share information about themselves and how they relate to the research community, such as keywords that describe their research, their national affiliation, and any other names that they might be known by. On the right-hand side, the researcher can list information about themselves, such as their biography, current past employers, and where they received their education. So as you scroll down the record, there's also space to capture professional memberships, funding that the researcher has received, and there's a new section that we call research resources, which are usually assets owned by a research organization, which the researcher applies to use and is awarded time with this asset. So an example might be a specialized telescope, a supercomputer, even a rare book collection. So the work section's at the bottom of the record, and this is usually the most populated section of the record. So this is where the researcher lists their scholarly output, such as journal articles, book chapters, and we support listing all forms of scholarly output. So we've created this short video to walk you through the ORCID record. We're not going to play it right now, but it is something that you can Google on Vimeo and then watch and share with your colleagues. So now we're going to switch. We're going to talk about ORCID for user facilities. So in this system architecture, there are three key groups. First is Sophie on the left with her ORCID ID and her record full of scholarly activities. Then in the middle is ORCID's registry. So this is the infrastructure that holds all the ORCID IDs and records. So currently we hold just over 1.5 million of these records from scholars all around the world and in every discipline. And then the third on the right is your facilities management system. So ORCID has developed an API to transfer the data between our registry and your systems. So anyone can call data from our public API, which is free to use, but with membership, you will also be able to write data to ORCID records using our member API. So stepping back and looking at ORCID and the overall research ecosystem, the researcher stays at the center of it all. The source of the data, like a publisher, funding agency, or facility, writes the data to the researcher's record, and then all the connected systems update their content about that researcher simultaneously. So as an example, when a researcher submits a manuscript with their ORCID ID to a publisher, and then the work is published, the citation is written to the researcher's record, which can then be automatically updating your facilities management system with this new citation. And then same goes for funding awards and employment status. So quickly, the three key benefits of ORCID. Number one, first and foremost, we reduce the administrative burden for both researchers and staff. We credit and track facility usage through research outputs, and reporting is easier because you can pull data to fill the reports. And I mentioned that we have 11.5 million ORCID IDs that we've issued, where we have members in 52 different countries. And so we are growing by the day, and it's a very exciting time to be with ORCID. All right, I'm going to pass it over to Carly now.
Great, thank you. Hello, again, my name is Carly Robinson, and I work in the Department of Energy's Office of Scientific and Technical Information, or DOE OSTI. You'll hear me use that acronym. And we lead the U.S. government ORCID Consortium. Next slide, please. So to give a little bit of history about the U.S. government ORCID Consortium, going back about 3 years now, ORCID noticed that DOE, Department of Energy organizations, national laboratories, user facilities, and lab libraries were creating and using ORCID IDs and joining ORCID as direct members. And ORCID actually reached out to myself and another colleague to discuss creating an ORCID consortium for DOE affiliated ORCID members. And if some of you were on earlier, I had mentioned to Dan, this actually happened at a SSURF meeting. So some of you might have been in attendance when we had this original discussion with some folks who were attending SSURF who were already ORCID direct members. And so this was not something that we had thought about before. You know, ORCID has the ability for members to join directly, or you know, kind of depending on if they fit, they can join with a consortium member as well. And so we hadn't thought about the idea of having a DOE ORCID consortium. So we went back, had some internal discussions, talked to some of the DOE associated ORCID members, some of the user facilities who are SSURF members, and thought that this would be a really good idea to bring together and create a community around using ORCID IDs. It would help decrease our membership costs and also provide increased ORCID services. And we felt that DOE OSTI could be a good organization to lead the ORCID consortium. Within OSTI, we provide a lot of persistent identifier services, and felt that this is something that we could really support. My office had already been ORCID member since 2013, so we were very familiar and very supportive of the organization and the concept of using ORCID IDs. And so we started the process of creating an ORCID consortium, specifically focused on DOE affiliated members originally. But as we were working to develop the consortium, we talked to a lot of our other US federal agencies about the consortium that we were developing. And there were a lot of other agencies that also wanted the opportunity to join an ORCID consortium and were interested in joining the consortium that we put together. So again, we had some internal conversations and felt like this is something that we could support and would really kind of help enhance the community to not only include DOE affiliated organization, but also other federal agencies and organizations. And so we broadened it and changed the name to the US Government ORCID Consortium. So it was all encompassing of US government organizations. And we just launched the consortium a little bit over a year ago now, April 1st of 2020. Next slide. So there are a lot of incredible benefits to joining an ORCID consortium. Like I mentioned, organizations can, of course, join ORCID directly, but they also have the opportunity to join an ORCID consortium. And one of the benefits that ORCID provides to consortium members is that all consortium members are premium ORCID members and get all of those premium member benefits. So just a couple of the benefits I'll mention, but ORCID has a great list that kind of compares and provides all of the benefits. But with premium membership, you get 5 API credentials, which allows larger organizations the ability to integrate with multiple systems. You get access to the on-demand public data file, which allows for immediate access to ORCID's public data. You get the opportunity to have update notifications, which allows for API-based notifications when changes are made to ORCID IDs embedded in your systems. And you also get personalized monthly analytic reports that are personalized for each API credential. So these were benefits that a lot of our members were really excited about. And then as a consortium, we also provide a number of benefits. So we can provide some more individualized support, both administrative and technical. ORCID, of course, provides amazing support, but sometimes we get to know the integrations or the members kind of even more fully, so we can help with that support as well. And then one of the huge benefits that we see is that consortium members are part of the US government community of practice. And so it's, a lot of organizations that have similar needs and similar use cases, all sharing that information and kind of talking about these specific use cases and needs. And so if you go to the next slide, talking about our fee structure. So we have 2 different fee structures depending on if your organization is affiliated with Department of Energy or if you're affiliated or part of another agency. And the reason that we have to have these 2 different structures is because, we can provide this service for Department of Energy and Department of Energy affiliated organizations. But if you are another federal agency, within the US government, other federal agencies cannot do work for other federal agencies without having agreements in place and kind of having cost recovery. So for other federal agencies, we have an administrative consortium fee, in addition to the ORCID membership fee that we pay to ORCID through the consortium. So ORCID's membership fee is based on the number of consortium members that the consortium has, and we currently have 12 members. So for DOE affiliated members, the cost of membership of joining the consortium and being an ORCID member is $5,000 per year. And for interagency members, the total is $7,500 per year, and that includes the administrative consortium fee. Next slide. So as I had mentioned, DOE OSTI, my organization, is the consortium lead organization. So our responsibilities include providing support for members who would like to join the consortium. For anyone who has joined a consortium, you might know that we try to make the process as streamlined and as easy as possible, but there's always a little bureaucracy that comes into play. So we help navigate all of that and get members on board. Once organizations join the consortium, we have an onboarding training that goes through, everything that you get with your ORCID membership and kind of what it means to be a part of the consortium. We provide administrative support. We serve as a central technical support contact and coordinate with ORCID on any technical support questions that might come up. We coordinate the community of practice, which I'll talk a bit more about in the next slide, develop resources specific to our community, and generally just help raise ORCID awareness. Next slide. So we help facilitate a community of practice, which provides opportunities for our members to share best practices, use cases, discuss challenges, raise ORCID awareness, share ORCID API integration ideas, identify potential collaborations, and offer benchmarking for organizations that are interested. And we host community calls every other month. They're the second Wednesday at 2 p.m. And our community calls are open to all of our consortium members. And these calls regularly have updates that ORCID is making to their services. If there are any updates from the consortium, we talk about them. And then at every meeting so far, we've had one of our consortium members give a presentation to talk about their ORCID API integrations, their future plans and ideas, and any challenges that they might have. And then also, very importantly, every meeting we make sure that we have time for community questions and discussion. And so far, we've had a lot of really good conversations. And in the future, we're planning webinars, trainings, and workshops specifically for our consortium members. And these might happen during the community calls or outside in kind of separate events. And as I mentioned, we're also developing a lot of community-specific resources. ORCID provides really incredible resources, and we're just trying to kind of add to that with some resources that are specific to our community. Next slide. As I mentioned, we have 12 members currently. I see a handful of you of the participants are actually our ORCID consortium members already, which is really wonderful. Like I mentioned, my organization OSTI is a member, and then we have a number of the DOE National Laboratories, so Pacific Northwest, Princeton Plasma Physics Lab, Oak Ridge National Lab, Los Alamos, and Berkeley. And Argonne, they decided to do things a little bit differently, which is wonderful. And they had their organizations kind of join as separate members. So from Argonne, we have the Advanced Photon Source, the Argonne Leadership Computing Facility, Argonne Research Library, and the Center for Nanoscale Materials. And at a lot of the other national labs that are members, their user facilities are using that lab ORCID membership. And then we have 2 interagency members so far. We have NASA and the USDA National Agricultural Library, but we have a handful of other federal agencies that are interested in potentially looking to join as well. Next slide. I think this is my last slide before I turn it over. I thought it might be helpful to kind of talk about some ORCID member use cases at a very high level, and then Jacki will talk about a specific use case in detail, but specifically highlighting, the opportunities for user facilities who become ORCID members and are using the ORCID APIs. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use the API. So I just listed a handful here. So some of the things that you can do is you can collect and authenticate ORCID IDs in facility management systems to associate those ORCID IDs with your researchers and users. You could require or accept ORCID IDs with facility use applications. So you could, collect those IDs with applications. You could connect facility management systems to populate those applications with information in an ORCID record. This could help reduce administrative burden when folks are filling out applications. You could also push use of the facility into an ORCID record. So once a researcher has come to your facility, used your facility, you could push that information, the fact that they used your facility and potentially what specific instruments they've used. You could also push review recognition. So if you have members of your community reviewing proposals, you could push that recognition into a researcher's ORCID record. And then you could also pull information and read information from an ORCID record to understand facility impact or potentially to pull information for reporting. So some of our other members go beyond user facilities. We have some funding offices, library organizations. And so those funding offices might have some similar use cases to the user facilities. They could accept or require ORCID IDs with applications, connect grant management systems to allow grant applications to be populated with ORCID record information, and also connect their grant reporting systems, those midterm reporting systems, to report on research outputs and potentially push those to ORCID records. And then, you could connect your researcher profile systems or, CV systems to pull information in from an ORCID record. Library organizations could push research outputs that they have in their library systems into researchers' ORCID record. And they could also synchronize those outputs that researchers update in their ORCID record so they have that information in their internal systems. And then across all of these organizations, you might be looking at impact or portfolio analysis, and ORCID could be really powerful in that. So, you could pull in researcher affiliation information, research output, awards, funding, all to kind of help understand your portfolio and impact of funding. And with that, I think I will turn it over to Jacki now. Thanks.
Thank you. I am Jacki Flood. I'm from the Advanced Photon Source at Argonne National Laboratory. I work in the user office, and ORCID has been my baby since the consortium was developed. We were one of the first few to join. So we're hoping to do great things, and we know that it's just a matter of time until we can really implement and get this ball rolling across all of the DOE complex. Next slide, please. I'm going to walk everyone through a quick demo of how we collect ORCID from our users. We have implemented the authentication and collection through our user registration. So a user comes to the Advanced Photon Source website and logs into their user portal if they're a returning user, or clicks the link to become a first-time user. And then we pull up this registration page that you see here. Argonne, the registration form that we use for APS also collects and manages registration for the Center for Nanoscale Materials. So what we have implemented is a dual authentication process through one focused area. So when you come into our user registration form, the user decides whether or not they're going to be a user of the Advanced Photon Source or the Center for Nanoscale Materials, or both. So these toggle buttons up here in the circle trigger the next step of the ORCID process. So depending on what they click will be the screens that they'll see once they get to the ORCID authentication step. Next slide, please. Down here is where they will authorize APS and or CNM as a trusted party. We have also included a link to the ORCID webpage for people who want more information and might not be aware yet what ORCID is. They can click on ORCID identifiers over here, and it will bring you right to the ORCID page for some more information. Typically, most people seem to already know what ORCID is, so that's a huge step and a good sign. Once they click on the toggle button there to authorize APS or CNM, it will bring you to the next page. Go ahead for the next slide, please. Where you can either sign into ORCID or sign up if you don't already have an account. I think Shauna mentioned that it's about a 2-minute sign up process, so it is not time consuming at all. And depending on which pathway the user chooses will determine if they're signing in or signing up. Go ahead and next slide, please. Once they sign in, we'll just go with that case. The first page to come up is the Advanced Photon Source. We ask right off the bat for full privileges to a user's ORCID record so that we don't have to backtrack later on down the line. So we ask to be able to add and update information about you, about your research activities, and then read your information with visibility set to trusted parties. So this is the max authorization that you can get to a user's ORCID record. Once the user authorizes access, they get directed to the slide or the picture on the right, which is thanking them for authorizing the APS to read and update the record. And then they're instructed to click here in order to move to the next step, which is authorizing CNM. Next slide, please. Then that same screen pops back up, but this time they're authorizing CNM instead of APS, or in addition to, really. And then once they authorize, they are given a final thank you with an instruction to go ahead and return to the registration. So once they click return to registration, it'll bring them right back into the APS CNM user registration form. Next slide. And here we are, where we have collected the ORCID ID and the access token from the ORCID side of things. So in developing this, we decided that this ID section is not a free-form typed section. The only way that we can put information in here is if it is pulled directly through that authorization and authentication process. So that way we are able to actually collect the authentication code, and we're not just getting all these ORCID numbers, but not getting the authorization in order to interact with the ORCID number and record. Next slide, please. Once the user submits their full registration and our administrative staff reviews the registration and approves it, it is then stored in our APS data warehouse, which is also not a free-form type field. Everything has to be pulled automatically, which reduces the chance of error in typing. Everybody does it. Dyslexia sometimes gets the best of us. So we figure the automated process would be best to make sure that there's no errors. Next slide, please. This is just a quick authorization workflow of how we pull the information. So first, it's the user registration calls ORCID to get the authorization code. Then ORCID returns the code. APS ORCID program calls ORCID again to get the ORCID data with the authorization code. And then ORCID returns the data, including the ORCID number and the access token and the user's name. And finally, APS ORCID program passes the ORCID and access token into our user registration form. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the APS ORCID policy. We do require the ORCID authentication for either APS or CNM as a trusted party in order for the user to fully submit the registration form for site access. If they click off deny in that authentication process, it kind of loops them just right back through to the same process until they eventually authenticate it. It will not, the registration form will not allow them to submit unless this step is successfully completed. We've had no pushback on this. The most we've gotten is just a few questions with users not quite familiar with what ORCID is, or really to make sure that they're following the steps in order to pull the information into the registration form fully. Some users get caught up on where to click and what process to follow. The record holder holds control of their ORCID record. So if at the time of authenticating their ORCID to the APS and CNM, later they decide, we're not going to be working there anymore, we don't need them in our record, they don't need to be a trusted party any longer, the user has the power to go in through their ORCID and remove any trusted organization. So therefore, because that is still within their power, the requirement hasn't gotten any pushback, like I said, from the user community. It's actually taken over quite nicely. Next slide, please. So we had a quick communication plan. We kind of went along as we were going, we tweaked things, but all in all, the communication plan went relatively smoothly. Our initial email was sent out to the user community to let them know that we were now requiring ORCID authentication throughout the registration. This was done back in January. We sent out a mass email to all of our user population. So that email included an overview of the benefits of ORCID. It included a link to the mini registration form that our IS team created for us, which I'll touch on in a moment. We also included the link to ORCID homepage, as well as a link to the ORCID library of videos, so people could really dive in and see what ORCID has to offer, and we could show the community how this is going to benefit everyone. So that mini registration communication plan is sent monthly after our initial launch. So what this means, maybe it'd be best just go to the next slide and I can explain what the mini registration is. So in terms of site access, most of our users get about a full 2-year site access for the laboratory, depending on their status documents. We did not want to wait a full 2 years for all of our active users who wouldn't need to re-register anytime soon. We wanted to be able to collect those authentications and ORCID numbers quickly. So our IS team created this mini registration, which pretty much just takes the ORCID section from the user registration into a miniature form, so the user doesn't have to fill out that whole entire form to register for the APS or the CNM all over again. This is just a quick one-stop shot to authenticate APS or CNM. So once the user clicks on either one of these radio buttons here next to APS or CNM, they can automatically be taken to authenticate right then and there, and it pulls the information right into the data warehouse like I showed you before. So again, this is simply for users who already have an active record, but they're not going to be re-registering anytime soon for us to be able to collect that authentication piece. So the communication plan for the mini registration was to send it out every month up until the point where we've collected a majority of the ORCIDs for the user community that come to the APS and the CNM. So far, next slide, please. There we go. We've successfully collected over 2,000 users' ORCIDs, and this is just from the mini registration, not including all of the new users that come in to register just to be a first-time user, where we collect their information at that point. So for June, we'll be sending out one more notification to the community with the link to that mini registration, and hopefully be able to collect another 1,000 or so ORCID records for our database. Next slide, please. So I think this might be one of my last ones, and this is our plans for the future. We do hope to eventually get to uploading APS service awards to ORCIDs. So this would be awarded beam time and then service to committees such as the APS user organization, partner user council, peer review panels, and any other committees that we hold through the APS. We are going to be integrating with hopefully the APS and ANL publication systems. Publications right now is a bit of a beast to control. So we've had a lot of good meetings going forward with ORCID and a couple of other organizations, and we plan to continue working together to implement that rollout. We also hope to connect to funding identifiers with DOIs. We've had some discussion with NSF, and they are hoping to also become an ORCID Consortium member. So that's very exciting. Then in the future for APS alone, we plan to connect ORCID with our different equipment and instruments, specific beamlines, techniques used, and proposals that users have submitted. So big plans for the future and being able to identify what scientific equipment and technique is being used and all shared through this user ORCID record. Next slide. I'm not sure if I have one more. Oh, that was all for me there. I'm thinking we're taking questions at the end if anybody has any questions about the actual implementation through the registration. I think it's back to Shauna or Carly.
think I'm taking this slide. Thanks, Jackie.
And
So,
Shauna or Carly, before you start, I just
sure.
wanted to reiterate what Jackie said. Please put questions in the chat, and at the end, then I'll be moderating through all of those. Thanks, Carly.
Great, thanks, Dan. So one thing that we thought you all might be interested in, kind of looking at US government policy and a presidential memorandum that came out in January titled Supported Research and Development National Security Policy. So this was a memo that came out, I think it was the very last week of the Trump administration, before the Biden administration took over. And this memo is still being supported by the Biden administration. So agencies are expected to implement what is in this memo. And as you might have figured out by the title of the memo, it is mainly focused on actions to strengthen protections of US government-supported R&D against foreign government interference and exploitation. So that is kind of the predominant focus of this memo, but there was one clause, or I think 1.5 clauses that kind of called out identifiers for people. It doesn't specifically say ORCID IDs, but you could imagine that, you know, ORCID identifiers could be a way to kind of implement it. And so I did want to call out kind of this one piece in the specific language in this memo, and it says, consistent with applicable federal laws and statutory authorities within 1 year of the memo, funding agencies shall establish policies regarding requirements for individual researchers supported by or working for any federal research grant to be registered with a service that provides a digital persistent identifier for that individual. So if you kind of interpret that, what it's saying is that each of the US government federal funding agencies needs to put a policy in place that addresses this concept of a persistent identifier for an individual. It doesn't specify what that policy has to say. It doesn't specify a specific identifier, but this is something that we just wanted to kind of let you know is being talked about. I can say at DOE, we're definitely talking about it, but it's also kind of being discussed with a number of kind of interagency groups as well. So nothing to report on it at this point, just wanted to make you aware of the memo and the fact that there's this language, and you can expect to hear more from a number of federal agencies, I'm sure, in the future.
Okay, and I'll quickly jump in for 2 last slides. So some of the new upcoming initiatives that we've just implemented. As Carly mentioned, with ORCID Consortium, ORCID prefers if members join through consortia rather than direct. We'd love our direct members, but we do notice that that community of practice really does support better ORCID implementations. So we do encourage consortiums, and we're creating tools that are only available to consortium members now. So the first one that we've rolled out is called the Affiliation Manager tool. And so that's if, as a member, you want to write to your members or ORCID records through a really simple tool. Like Jacki's built a wonderful, thorough, strong tool. But if you need something lightweight that maybe an administrator or even a summer student could use or would like to use, this is a quick, easy tool that if you join a consortium, you can use it. Second, without I quickly mention, a lot of federal agencies in the US and around the world are requiring DMPs or data management plans. And so with ORCID, we've just created, we do accept this into that work section at the very bottom of the ORCID records. So just to help with transparency, so researchers can demonstrate that they have created a data management plan. And then third, this is really exciting, and this is goes across the whole research ecosystem, is this new credit taxonomy. So giving credit to not just the authors of a work, but 14 different types of kinds of people who have contributed to that work as well, and giving them the opportunity to be recognized. So publishers are implementing this, and we're also part of that group that's enabling this new infrastructure. And then our sister organization, Crossref, and Jacki and Carly both referenced this, they grant DOIs, traditionally have granted DOIs to works, so mostly articles, and that's a unique identifier for an article. This summer, so the next few months, they're going to be launching and going into production with granting DOIs for grant awards. granting, that's the double use of the word grant. I'm going to say that again. They will issue a unique ID, DOI, to a grant award. And so that way, if you are registered with Crossref, and Carly can help you with that, then your researchers issued an award, it will be automatically written to their ORCID record. Crossref and ORCID are sibling institute or sibling organizations. So we work together and coordinate our infrastructures. So be confident, Carly, as well across all of this. And if you have any questions, that US Government Consortium is a great resource for everybody. Okay, well, I think we can hand it back to Dan now.
Wow. All right. Thank you. Such great information here, and a lot of questions are coming in. So I'm going to try to read through those quick, and as quick as you have an answer, know that we probably have a good dozen here to get to. Are proposal reviewers who are not also users also required to authenticate their ORCID IDs at APS?
Currently, no, but I'm not sure how many reviewers we would have that wouldn't also be an active user. I feel like the two of those pretty much go in hand. So likely over 90% would probably have already authenticated because they are active users. I do some of the, I sit in on a few of the PRPs, and I know all of the ones on my panel are active users. But currently, if they aren't, then no, they are not yet required to. Okay.
And another question for you, Jacki, how do you deal with users who rescind access to their ORCID profile after completing registration? Does your system see that update occur and force users to reauthorize before they can proceed?
We haven't yet come across that issue. And currently, the way that it's programmed, I do not believe that our system would be notified, but it is definitely a good point to keep in mind for me to bring up to our IS team to see if there is a way that we can receive a notification. But at the current moment, we haven't run across that issue yet.
Okay. And Carly, this may be for you. Is there a plan for federated authentication or authorization for providing services across multiple DOE agencies?
No, that's a great question. So I think this, so there is no plan yet, but I think this is a great conversation that the community, our community could discuss if there's interest in doing that. So, you know, Jacki provided a wonderful example where it made sense for the APS and CNM to do this kind of joint authentication. And so I could see for, you know, I think, and some of you participants will know this much better than I do, but I think there's some discussion about, you know, similar use cases of, or use cases of similar user facilities across DOE, potentially having joint proposal systems. And so, you know, I think that's an area where, you know, if there's a single proposal system, you know, you could kind of have that joint authentication. So I definitely think that would be an area of interest. And Jacki, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No,
that you pretty much covered it all. Sorry.
All right. Well, stay on there, Jacki. And this is another question for you. Courtney was asking, if I understood correctly, users must grant the facilities access to update their ORCID record. Was there any discussion during development to give them the option to link their ORCID ID to their user record so you have it on file, but to opt out of having the facilities to update their ORCID record?
No, we decided right off the bat that we wanted to be able to have full interaction capabilities. So we just went straight for the requirement of the authentication. Does that answer that question?
I think so. I'll check and see if Courtney writes back in a clarification. All right. Kevin's asking, is there a way for researchers to bulk import their publications from Web of Science or Scopus, Scival, rather than manually entering them one at a time? Sean has probably gotten that question several times.
Yeah. So yes, we do provide a few different techniques and tools. So when you go into your ORCID record and you go into the work section, you add works, there's something called their search and link. And so in there, we've worked with a couple different groups, including OSTI, and Scopus from Elsevier. And so you can log in and you can use Elsevier's or OSTI's tool, and it'll take you to their database of citations. You look for yours, you claim yours, and then you write them to your ORCID record. And then on your ORCID record, when you see the citation, the source will be that database that the citations came from, just so when people review your record, they know the source of that citation. Carly, do you want to add anything about your search and link wizard?
Sure, yeah. So this is something that we worked with ORCID on recently. And so at OSTI, we have our primary search tool, osti.gov, where if you are DOE funded or at one of the DOE national labs, hopefully your research outputs, so primarily your publications, technical reports, data sets, software are submitted to OSTI, and we have records in osti.gov. And so you can, through that search and link wizard, you can come to osti.gov, you can search for your name, and it'll list all of the records that have been submitted to OSTI. And as Shauna said, you can claim those and add those to your ORCID records, so you don't have to add each one of your works separately.
And just let me add quickly, that's our preference, is for people to use this. Actually, our number one is for the source of the data to write it to researchers' records automatically, and we're getting there, we're doing well. Second are the search and link wizard tools. And then third, we do provide the option to upload a bibtext file. Usually citation management systems will be able to export. It's not great, but it's better than, as you said, one at a time. So we provide a few different tools, and we're continuing to work on it, and especially getting the source of the data to write it to our researchers' records.
Okay, Alicia asks, as a DOE program, do we need to register with Crossref for the grant DOI, or does OSTI help with that?
Yes, Alicia. So we have what we call our award DOI service. And this is a pilot service that we're working with a couple user facilities specifically. So to develop this. So we worked with JGI and EMSL to develop the requirements. But if you are interested in learning more about that service, please let me know. But the award DOI service is based off of the Crossref grant DOI that they provide. We just use the term award versus grant because grant can mean a very specific thing in our community. But yes, you can work with us to assign those Crossref DOIs to awards or proposals that are successful at your facility. And I think Sean had mentioned this, but in that new Crossref service, the metadata schema is specifically tailored to capture information about grants, awards, contracts. So it is different metadata than getting I guess what you might call a traditional Crossref DOI for journal articles or technical reports, text-based documents.
Okay, how about a question back to the pricing for the via the consortium? Shannon's asking if you could review that pricing again for a new center to join via the consortium. If you're coming in, does it depend on whether multiple user facilities at a particular lab join at once together?
Sure. So we leave that pretty open and leave it up to the lab or facility on kind of what they prefer to do. So some of our members have joined as an entire lab. So for example, most recently, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab decided to join as one consortium member. Now they have many user facilities, of course, and different organizations that will be utilizing that membership. And so you get 5 API keys that immediately come with your membership, but then you can purchase additional API keys. And so, for example, what Berkeley did is they purchased 5 additional API credentials. So they had 10 total. So I think they're going to be utilizing 8 out of the 10 right off the bat with different user facilities. So you could definitely take that approach, or you could do what Argonne chose to do. And I think just because of internal bureaucracies, I guess, figuring out who's going to pay for what and all of that, it made more sense for Argonne to have each one of their facilities join separately. And so they chose for each of their members to kind of join individually. And so either option is perfectly great. And we just kind of leave it up to you all to decide what makes the most sense for you.
Okay, a quick follow-up on that one. Shannon saying, thanks, Carly. She's at Berkeley Lab and didn't know about those details and wonders if you might be able to point her to the person at Berkeley Lab who is most in the know, and you can email her. Well, I'll share that info offline.
Absolutely. Yes. Happy to do so.
All right. Andrea's asked, how are plans going to get institutions, equipment, instruments, beamlines, etc., to get their own persistent identifiers? That might be another webinar we can arrange.
Yes. I can maybe jump in a little bit, but then would love to hear from the others as well. So, you know, as we're thinking about this entire space of persistent identifiers, right, where we're specifically talking about persistent identifiers for people here, but, you know, there are persistent identifiers for organizations. So, you know, there are a couple different options there, but Research Organization Registry is a great persistent identifier for institutions or organizations. Equipment, you know, I think there are a couple ways that you can do that, but there are a number of organizations that work with OSTI and facilities that work with OSTI that choose to assign DOIs at the equipment, instrument, or beamline level. And so they can absolutely do that. And again, we kind of leave it up to you all to decide the appropriate level at which to assign DOIs. But there is, I think, a lot of conversations happening in this space. And I think that the best practices, particularly on persistent identifiers for equipment, instrument, and beamlines, are kind of ongoing discussions, because I think depending on how you define those things can really inform kind of the approach to persistent identifiers.
All right. Any other comments there, Shauna and Jackie?
Carly is really a great part of our whole persistent identifier community. So as you know, I really encourage all of you to reach out to Carly and her team. They're all incredible. These are all, we're really excited to get the instrument identifiers into the ORCID records and share those. And I'm also working with different funding agencies, and they're very keen to know what instruments are used with their funding, and then to see the performance and the scholarly output that comes from that. So the more IDs we can use, the more we can understand and appreciate and, you know, give credit to all the hard work that our researchers are doing. So I really appreciate it. And, you know, Jackie and everybody else who's implementing these, you know, our persistent identifier community has a conference once a year. We like to make it really fun. It's called PIDapalooza. And it was virtual last year. It was, I'm not joking, a 24-hour international conference. We held it 24 hours. It was incredible. And so anybody who's working in this area and you want to, you know, implement and then tell everyone else around in the world about your project, there'll be lots of people listening and wanting to hear. So please let us know.
All right. Actually, I think building on what you've just been discussing, David's asked, what can user facilities think of posting to ORCID records regarding awards, for example, facility access or time at a facility? That might be a bit of an open brainstorm right now that SURF can help convene that kind of conversation.
Yeah, and so there was a really wonderful working group that ORCID facilitated, the user facility working group, and there was great conversation in that working group to develop, with ORCID, of course, leading the way, the research resources section of ORCID records. And that's kind of specifically to do exactly what you're talking about, David, to post kind of use of facilities in that section. And so there are a number of DOE user facilities already doing that. So EMSL's a great example. I think SNS and HIFER are already doing that. And I think, as Jackie mentioned, that's something that's in APS's, and I'm guessing CNM's plans for the future as well.
All right, then I have still a couple more. A follow-up from Courtney's question. And she said, thanks to Jackie. She was mostly curious because at EMSL, they allow users to choose up front whether or not they allow them to update their ORCID record. And they have to authenticate with ORCID either way, but some don't choose that option to allow EMSL to update their record for them. And we give them the option to change this decision in their user profile later. Would that kind of flexibility seem like reasonable, or would that be something you're still looking to tighten up?
In terms of the way that we're implementing it right now, I think we're just going to keep it at the authentication piece. And then, like we said, if they so choose to remove us as that trusted party, because ultimately down the road, being able to pull and push that information both ways is going to help everybody throughout the process. So if we revoke that kind of access or tighten it up or loosen it up, then we won't be able to completely figure out, implement what we want to implement, excuse me.
Okay. And also a follow-up, Carly and Shauna, David said he'd gladly join a discussion on PIDs for the amazing instruments that exist at the facilities. Or should I say PIDs, as I get used to different acronyms here. But the user facilities, David says, are used by so many ORCIDs, it makes a lot of sense to keep this conversation going.
Well, and just jump in. Oh, just quickly, David, we're looking for researchers to volunteer for our new advisory council. So if you are an active researcher yourself, please sign up, because that would be a tremendous contribution to the group. Sorry, Carly.
No. I was just going to add that this is a conversation that has happened also in the Research Data Alliance, and they had a working group specifically discussing what metadata should be collected about instruments when assigning persistent identifiers, and they put out a recommendation that is mapped to the DataCite DOI metadata schema. And so, you can get a DataCite DOI using DataCite metadata for instruments, and they have kind of a mapping for that. So there's a lot of great work happening in that space as well. But I'm sure there will be lots more conversation.
Okay, just a couple minutes to go. I wondered if you might have a recommendation on who any listener or viewer of this webinar could check with or know is in the role at their organization to understand the status of that executive order on persistent identifiers. Is there a particular staff position that you're aware of across federal agencies who would be tasked with keeping an eye on exactly what is manifesting around that executive order?
That's a great question. And unfortunately, I don't have a good answer across all of agencies. Because there are kind of these two pieces, it's primarily focused on research security. And so I think there are a lot of kind of intramural and extramural research, like policy offices within agencies that are focusing on that, because I think the implementation of that piece is going to be kind of collecting disclosure information, potentially, with proposals for funding and things like that to disclose any conflict of interest or other funding. And, I think that has already been happening at many federal agencies for a long time, but potentially strengthening that. So I think that'll probably be more in like the funding offices or funding policy offices. But the persistent identifier piece, I think is very different people potentially at agencies. And so potentially library, agency library organizations would probably be more up to date on the persistent identifier piece of that memo.
All right. Well, thank you all very much for this hour of conversation and update on just what's happening in the realm of persistent identifiers, ORCID in particular. I appreciate your time, and we will make this webinar available to share across your networks. And thanks again. We'll stay in touch. SURF will continue to keep posting these kind of webinars to share best practices. Thanks everyone for listening in, and we'll make this available to you. You'll get an email from me in the next day with a link to all this detail. Thanks. Okay.